So today I'm going to talk about a few different things. I'm going to talk about what we know, what we don't know, any questions you might have, preconceived notions. I'm going to talk about bats in New Mexico. We're going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to talk about the threats that they faced, one of them being white nose syndrome. How many here have heard of white nose syndrome? Okay, most of you. Okay, great. How we study them, how do we find out more about white nose syndrome, different ultrasonic research that's been going on, and last of all, how we can help bats. And I did see a bat house outside of Peak, so I see that these attempts are being made. So that's great. So I'm going to start with asking you all some questions. I like to interact a little bit. There's no need to listen to me drone on for half an hour. Next slide. Maybe. There we go. So what do you know about bats? What don't you know? What do you think people are afraid of? Just feel free to shout things out. When you think of bats, what do you think? You do think rabies, absolutely. Nocturnal? Yep. Other things? They eat lots of bugs. That's right. Yeah. They can be pollinators. That's right. Certain species are pollinators. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that's pretty neat stuff. Okay, so yeah, rabies, of course, is a big one. Do we think bats are blind? No, they do have eyes, right? They're very small eyes. They're very sensitive to light, but they do see. Okay, next slide. So it has an extra, it's called a tragus. There's an extra fold of skin in the front, inside the front of the wing. And that's actually one of the things we measure to tell species apart. So we look at the length of the tragus. The tragus, yeah. So some myths and some truths. Bats have been on Earth for 52 million years, back to the Eocene epoch, and although fossil records are sparse, indicates bats were diversifying and flying around across different continents by that time. Origins could have been even earlier, 10 million years following the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. So there are over 1,400 different species of bats in the world. They're the second most diverse order of mammals after rodentia. And some have faces that only their maternity roost mates could love, of course, right? But some of them look like puppies, right? So I love these faces. I think they're pretty spectacular. So the largest bat in the world, you can go ahead and advance, yeah, there you go, is the golden crowned flying fox. Wingspan over 5.5 feet. And then next slide, you have the world's smallest bat. This is the kitty hognose bat, also known as a bumblebee bat. All right, these flying foxes and little bats tend to be in Southeast Asia. Australia is where the flying foxes are, but other parts of Southeast Asia also have flying foxes. And of course, they're called flying foxes because they look like foxes. They're adorable. So this little tiny bat is the smallest known mammal on Earth, weighing less than a penny. So even if you think about a shrew, right, we're talking smaller than that. They're also one of the slowest reproducing mammals on Earth for their size. So most bats only give birth to one pup a year. Some interesting facts. Next slide. So go ahead and advance. That next will make sense. This makes bats truly unique, and why you could claim that other mammals fly, think flying squirrels, sugar gliders, bats are the only true flying mammals on the planet. And they can go impressive distances. The Mexican free-tailed bat, which we all know from Carlsbad and other places, they can fly up to 60 miles in a night looking for prey and back to their roost. The lesser long-nosed bat, which I'll talk about later, has been recorded flying more than 1,000 miles during its migration. Pretty remarkable. I think you can keep advancing. These are just some fun pictures. Let's see. So bats, not all bats hibernate. That's an interesting fact, right? So some bats have summer roosts and winter roosts, even if they are hibernating bats. They change depending on the season. This depends on location, temperature, how crowded they want it to be. Some migrate, like I just said, instead of hibernate. Some roost alone. Often males will roost alone, especially in summer, and some can be found in groups of thousands in our caves. And one species in particular, this tube-nosed bat here in the snow, is the only one known to hibernate in snow, a behavior seen only in polar bears. So these bats from Eastern Asia create small cavities, which act as insulating dens, and they protect them from the elements and predators during the winter. Next slide. Awesome. So cool things about bats, right? So they hang upside down with specialized tendons in their feet. Now, I used to think of bats like that looked like a lot of work. How are they hanging like that? Well, in fact, their knees face backward. That's one way that they can get around the curvature of caves. And along with a tendon mechanism, they can easily grip and hang upside down. In fact, the tendons on their feet are specialized, and when relaxed, they lock their claws in place. This means they can hang without having to use any sort of muscles or strength. And hanging upside down is a strategic roosting behavior, right? It's a kind of a niche. It allows them to rest in elevated, hard to reach places, like cave dwellings or tree branches away from predators. And this action is called passive locking. Now, to take flight, a bat simply needs to flex its leg muscles to release the tendons and drop into the air, which has actually been shown to be much easier than taking off from a branch like a bird does. It takes less energy. But if you do encounter bats on the floor, why do you think they're flapping around on the floor now that you know this? Right. Yes. Did you have a thought? Yeah. They can't get any elevation, right? They can't lift off. So really a lot of time rescuing a bat just involves getting them to a high location where they'll climb and they'll turn upside down. It's kind of neat. You put them like this and they'll turn around. That allows them to take off. They have enough lift in that situation. Next slide. And you can just move forward on this one too. So they're crucial pollinators in certain parts of the world, right? They are pollinators for more than 500 species of plants, mostly tropical and desert climates. They're vital for flowering plants that open at night, of course, like many of our desert flowers. Their large size and fur allow them to carry pollen around even more so than an insect could do. And they fly long distances, which can help plants disperse their pollen to really far out remote areas. And they can use their echolocation to find specialized flowers, especially flowers with strong, musty odors. And we wouldn't have bats, of course. I mean, we wouldn't have these things without those, we wouldn't have those plants without bats. There you go. Thank you. So avocados, mangoes, guavas, agave, to name a few. You can thank bats for your tequila. Yes. Oh, that's one of our pollinating bats that we have here. I think that's a lesser long-nosed bat. It's got its face all the way inside of a flower. Yeah, yeah. And you'll see a lot of these pictures had to be taken in sort of a lab environment. Scientists have taken the time to do that. Put them in dark rooms. Next slide. Whoops. So, insects have the most to fear from bats, not people, right? So we talked about it a little bit before. They're insectivorous, most bats in North America. Some studies suggest that bats can consume their whole body weight in a night. So if you think of a single little brown bat, they can eat up to 8 grams of insects in a single night. And by doing this, they of course are great pest controllers, right? Good for the replacement of pesticides in some places. They eat mosquitoes, they prevent things like West Nile virus. They catch insects, in fact, using the Eurypetagium, which is that flap of skin that's by their feet. And I don't think I have a great picture of it here, but you'll see what I'm talking about. And they actually don't fly and catch insects in the air with their mouth. They scoop the bugs up with that extra piece of skin and put it into their mouth. Next slide. So bats have few natural predators, right? So disease is the biggest one. And that's the less fun part about this topic that we'll get into. But owls, hawks, and snakes will eat bats, but there's nothing compared to the millions that are dying right now from white nose syndrome. This disease, named for the white fungus on the muzzle and wings of bats, affects hibernating bats and has been detected in 40 states and 9 Canadian provinces. And it continues to spread. Next slide. So only 6% of bats tested are actually positive for rabies. This is important, I think. There is a reason there's a connection between bats and rabies. It does happen. While they can carry the rabies, majority do not. It's transmitted through saliva or brain tissue of an infected animal, through bites or scratches. So why are they good vectors for rabies? Combination of factors, really. So they're the only mammals capable of sustained flight, allows them to disperse the virus further and over long distances to other bats and other environments. Their social nature facilitates transmission. Bats are incredibly fastidious. They will clean and groom each other and themselves all the time, kind of like cats. They're very clean. Hibernation helps the virus spread through the winter. And finally, they have unique immune systems that allow them to carry the virus without becoming seriously ill. So seeing bats from a distance or even touching guano blood doesn't transmit rabies. Right? You need an actual solid bite and a good scratch. Next slide. So most bats, at least in our part of the world, only have one pup a year. A couple different species have twins. And this reproduction is pretty interesting. So they have short gestational periods. Most small mammals do, but they buck this trend. So these insectivorous bats in temperate climates gestate for about 3 months, which is a long time for a tiny animal. Tropical fruit bats can take as much as 5 months, and vampire bats up to 7 months. So bat babies are also really big comparatively. For some species, newborns can weigh over 40% of their mother's body weight. Pretty remarkable. And most bats, as I said, give birth to one pup. A few can have multiple. Twins are common in some species. They do give birth upside down, as would make sense. Babies are born hairless and with their eyes closed, and infants immediately will crawl up the mom's belly to find a place to drink. Bats have been observed carrying, suckling pups while flying, which is pretty remarkable. Many bats, females gather in large colonies to give birth. And these nurseries keep pups warm and enable bats to ward off predators when there's more of them around. So giving birth in groups helps another, there's been observations of other mothers helping a birthing mother, which is pretty neat. And in fact, they've observed sort of a wet nurse situation where baby bats will crawl onto other bats and feed. In most species, pups learn to fly within 3 to 5 weeks after birth, but they'll remain with their mothers for several months, up to 5 months in some cases. All right, next slide. So bats, I love that picture. So bats closer to home. Does anybody know what species that is? It's a pretty common one we have here. I think they have pretty unique faces with that pointy flat head. It's one way to tell. I do like the whiskers. It's got hairs on the chin like I do. So that's a Mexican free-tailed bat. How many have been to Carlsbad? Yeah, it's a pretty phenomenal place. Hundreds of thousands of bats. So how many bat species do you think are here in New Mexico? Any guesses? Okay. And we already talked a little bit about it. What do our bats like to eat? Insects. But there's a few that are pollinators. And where do they go in the winter? Anybody have ideas? They'll even go further south, some of them. And some of them, a majority of them actually stay here. Yeah, I was waiting for someone to shout, but I'm happy. We have 24 different species of bats. That's been debated in some places, whether it's 25, depending on where things are moving around, but 24 species of bats in the state, which leads to this question or to this really cool image. So this is next slide, USGS slide of richness, diversity, and you can see where we are in the United States, pretty high in diversity. And the reason for that, of course, is due to that migratory corridor, right? So we get to include some really cool pollinating bats that move. But also there are a handful of our insectivorous bats that do go south. So that's pretty neat. You know, when I tend to think bats, I want to think like the South. I want to think like, you know, hot, warm climates maybe for some reason, and that's not the case at all. Even though we would think that we're a hot climate, we've got a really nice, intricate cave system. We've also got a lot of mines around here. So there's a few different reasons for that. Yes, there are. I'm not an expert on those bats, but yes, we do. So next slide. So just a handful of our most common adorable faces of the bats we have here. There's that Mexican free-tailed bat, the big brown bat, little brown, pallid, spotted, silver-haired, the hoary bat, and Townsend's big-eared bat. These are our most common species, right? We have more. And these pictures always make me smile because they look like your senior photos. And many of these photos were taken by a scientist named Merlin Tuttle. He's a pretty famous bat biologist who took hundreds of pictures over his career of bats in a laboratory setting to get these cool pictures. And I always wondered why they weren't upside down. Maybe they were, is what I'm thinking, and then they flipped them for the photos, but I just think they're pretty cute. And you can see that bat scientists are, just like bird scientists, not always the most creative with their bat names. We kind of go right for it, big brown bat. When I tell somebody on the phone it's a big brown bat, they're like, yeah, I know it's a big brown bat. Well, what's it called? It's a big brown bat. Next slide. But here's something cool. We have a few different species of nectar-feeding bats. These maps are taken from BCI, and they're working a lot on Bat Conservation International. They have some scientists that specialize on these migratory nectar-feeding bats. Lesser long-nosed bats, Mexican long-nosed, and the Mexican long-tongued bats feed on a variety of different cactus flowers. Century plants are a big one, agave. And what's cool is these ranges are changing and expanding. And that has a lot to do with the fact that these bats are using something that people hang outside their house. Any guesses? Hummingbird feeders. That's right. So next slide. I don't know if this video is going to play, but it's just a picture, or it's a video of a bat feeding from a hummingbird feeder. So really cool things are coming forward, DNA analysis of saliva at these hummingbird feeders. So they've recently found the presence of the Mexican long-nosed bat in Arizona. The range is changing. New non-invasive method for tracking these bats and their routes. So actually they call upon people that live down in that area, often the Boot Heel, to collect samples at these feeders. So it's kind of neat. They don't have to catch them necessarily. They can just do the work right there with the saliva. Next slide. Oh yeah, the video might stall you. There you go. So as I mentioned, there are a few insectivorous bats that do migrate from here. There's the hoary bat. Mexican free-tailed will move. They are moving, of course, for a food source, right? So these bats will migrate to avoid the cold and lack of insects in winter. And of course, with migration comes challenge. And that challenge most recently has been in the form of things like wind turbines. Wind turbines have been shown to kill a lot of bats. So bats are sort of drawn to lights. Those farms are ginormous. Bats are moving through. And lights, of course, can attract bugs. And these little bats are getting trapped in those situations. So things are underway to sort of curb this problem. Changing the way the lights work, the timing of the lights, changing how fast things rotate if something is picked up on a sensor, right? This is the same problem that migratory birds face. So people are working on it. Next slide. So white nose syndrome, most of you have heard of it. It's a fungal disease killing hibernating bats in North America. It's named for a soil fungus, I always have a hard time with this name, Pseudogymnasis destructans, we call it PD for short. It likely originated in Western Europe, somewhere in the 2000s. It arrived in North America. It had a devastating effect of species in upstate New York, was the first detection around 2006. And so far it's spread across the United States. It's killed over 90% of particular species. So northern long-eared was my study species as grad work. And the first summer I was there in 2011, we were outside a cave and caught as many bats as we wanted. I think we tagged 65 bats. And then the next summer I come back to follow up and we caught 5. So around that time, and this was in West Virginia, there was a sharp crash in populations, and shortly after that, the species was listed. Little brown bats have been listed due to this disease. A tricolored bat, which we have in the eastern part of the state, is now being considered for listing, although I think things like that are kind of on hold at the moment. Good question. No. People are trying to find different methods. There's a lot of money being thrown at it, thankfully. People are dealing with a vaccine, some sort of treatment you could wipe the bat with. There's RNA analysis going on. The question is, how do you capture enough bats to make a difference to treat them? Inoculating a single bat, hard to say if that would make much of a difference. What is very interesting in eastern part of the state and New York is that some of those populations are starting to level out, not nearly to the numbers they were before, but there are survivors of some of these places. I was in a cave not very long ago where 3 years previous they had found 500 or 5,000 bats, and when we went in there a couple years later, we found about 30. And the question is, we're not seeing those bats anywhere. We don't know where they're dying. We don't know what's going on. So you're dealing with an incredibly elusive species. It's just very hard to track where they're going. But there are survivors in those caves. They're the ones that are hanging on. So yet to see how that turns out. High death rates. I talked about this already. Why is it so deadly? So next slide. Actually, you can go forward 2 slides. Well, right there is a great picture, though, first of all. This is a very famous photo of one of the first places that it was detected. You can see the white fuzz, the fungus growing on the arms and the nose. You can see the patches on the wings. And when you shine a UV light, you can also see remnants of the fungus on the wings. Okay, so what's it doing? And why is it doing this? So this fungus thrives in cool environments. Humid places, perfect, right? Caves and mines. When a bat's metabolism slows during hibernation, the fungus invades the skin, causing lesions and wing damage. And that growth you can see. This triggers premature arousal and depleting fat reserves and leading to dehydration, starvation, and death. So humans, of course, can inadvertently spread this fungus as well. And that's how we think it began on the east and the northeast, is probably cavers, somebody within the vicinity of the cave came in with something on them and it spread. So we as bat biologists have to take a lot of precautions when we're dealing with bats, whether we're just handling them or whether we're in a cave. It's something we all take very seriously when we have meetings. We all talk about new decontamination methods, what's working, what's not working. So this is, of course, a hot topic in the caving community, right? So cavers don't want to be told that they have to leave a cave alone. And so it's controversial, as you can imagine. Some places have to be gated to keep people out. Some places are in support of doing things like that. Other places, there's not a lot of restriction in place. Next slide. So it spread quickly across the West, as I said. It's now here in New Mexico. A couple of years ago, it was found in 2 different counties, mostly in the southeast part of the state. Now I believe it's in 3 different counties. And in order to find out if bats are conclusively infected with this disease, you have to look at the skin. You have to collect these bats. So there's a lot of effort going in, as I mentioned, vaccines, decontamination strategies, all of that. We have yet to see what it will do. Go ahead and next slide. Okay, so how do we get their hands on them? This is sort of the fun part, right? How do we study bats? Any ideas? Yes, mist net's a great way. Any other ways to detect them or find them or play with them? Yeah, bat boxes are great sources, right? You can see them emerge. Yeah. So, of course, trying to catch these animals comes with lots of challenges. They only move at night, right? They're very adept flyers. They're very good at avoiding people. So we use a combination of things. We can use mist nets, passive acoustic recorders. Night vision is great. So there's a few different ways. Go ahead, next slide. So you try to get your hands on them. We use mist nets just the same as you do with birds. And with bats, location is everything with your net. Water's a great source. Ponds, stock ponds, a trough, creeks. We like to put our nets across open water, and that's a good way to catch them. Also, corridors, roads that have sort of some coverage that give a fly path. You have to sort of think like a bat. Where would they fly? And on the side here is a cool picture. This is called a harp trap, and it's exactly what it sounds like. In West Virginia, we had a small cave opening. You put this trap that has wires going down like a harp, and at the bottom is a sort of like a little scoop. And the bats fly out, not seeing the harp trap, and hit the wires and fall into this little trough, and you can just scoop them up. So it's a lot easier than dealing with tangled mist nets. No, not at all. Nope. A little surprised because here they were emerging for the night, and boom, kind of like a mist net. Next slide. I thought this was a neat image. It gives you the sense of the sheer size that you can get with your nets. Most companies, most nets are around 4 to 8 feet tall, various widths. Now it's become a whole industry of this technology. So triple high systems can get up to 26 feet. Poles and levees and carabiners, if you got a bat on the top, you have to get it down. And one study I saw has used a system that's over 90 feet tall. So getting those high flying bats. You do, absolutely. For birds, right? Birds are bycatch. It's a good question. I actually was just talking to a bat friend the other day who said that she got a flicker in her net right before sundown and panicked because she didn't know what to do. So people who deal with bats have a very different perspective on how to get a bird out of a net, right? Different process, but same material. Next slide. All right, so what do we do once we have a bat in our gloved hands? And why do you think we use gloves? Yeah, exactly right, both of those things. So bats have incredibly sharp teeth. I remember the first time I ever held one, I was very surprised. And the size of the bat matters. So little tiny bats, you're okay using a smaller glove. Their only means of defense is to bite. It's the only thing they can do. And they bite a lot. And they have pinpoint sharp teeth because they have to break through those insect covers, right? So they bite, and bigger bats will go right through a leather glove, which is pretty remarkable. And then on top of those gloves, we also wear like a latex glove to put between different bats. We always change our gloves around, right, in case there's some issue of transmission of anything at all. We look at things like forearm length, weight, all those different measurements, body condition. We look at the tragus size, as I mentioned, ear size, the length of the tail membrane. This all helps with identification because there's a lot of myoted bats, genus myoted, that look a lot alike. And so you really have to take your time with these measurements and try to differentiate different species of bats. Sometimes you can collect blood. And then if you have the opportunity, you swab for white nose. And that's what it sounds like. You take a Q-tip and you wipe the bat, all over the bat, and you submit that to the National Health wildlife folks. Next slide. We also conduct roost counts. So if you're lucky to know where there's a nice roost, you go in there in the winter, if possible, and you get a sense of those trends over time. Full protective gear. Caves are really cold, but I have to say it's one of the most fun things that I do. And getting into those caves is always a trick. It's amazing the bats get into some of these places, but depending on the depth and where you are in the cave, you'll see different species of bats. So towards the opening, where it's a little warmer, we sometimes see Townsend's big-eared bats. As you go further back, you'll see cave myotis. It all depends. It's pretty interesting. We also I have done telemetry telemetry studies when I was a student, which involves putting a tiny little telemetry unit on the back of the bat. We stick this on with skin bond glue, which sounds a little nutty, but it works. And those units can stay on for a couple weeks. They fall off, but it allows you to track the bat for a good couple miles. I think I found a bat using the receiver. Um, and by understanding where they roost, of course, we can help protect where they live and where they sleep. Next slide. So this ultrasonic research is up and coming. This is another hot topic right now. Detection acoustically began with the military. World War I is when people started to use sound locators, gramophones, and horns to amplify sounds into a headset. In 1920s and 30s, it became more advanced, right, as a air defense mostly. And scientists have grabbed onto this idea. Technology has taken on a variety of different forms since then. So you can go ahead and skip. And I think there's a bunch of photos here. So there's all sorts of shapes and sizes, right? So some of the first technology was also underwater, looking at submarine technology. You have these long bells that will hang hundreds of feet below the surface of the ocean. You have ones that you can attach to whales and dolphins. Let's just stick it right on their back, which is pretty cool to pick up sounds. Of course, you have to retrieve them again. And then, of course, the land-based units. They've gone from these ginormous systems to something the size of your palm. So the technology is growing quickly and rapidly and getting very sophisticated. Next slide. So I can talk a little bit about ARUs, or acoustic recording units, or autonomous units, as some people call them. It's getting more advanced, as I said. Cabled version without a cable was a big deal about 30 years ago. GPS is now included, all of these cool features. Microphones have become more sophisticated and more sensitive. I've been able to pick up, the buzz of a fly flying by. I can pick up a bird that's maybe a quarter mile away. Hard to tell distances on these things, but they're pretty fun. And so what we know about individual species and their specific sounds and idiosyncrasies has evolved immensely. So scientists are starting to create sound libraries. Different species of animals, of course, make very unique sounds, birds especially. So that's the acoustic world, right? You know the frequency range of a species. You can set your unit to detect just that species, so needle in a haystack situation. We have pinion jays around here that we're curious about. We put out detectors for pinion jays. And once you understand what that special spectrogram looks like for that bird or that species, it really helps you find what you're looking for. Yeah. Yep. So this is cool. So these are these mini bat detectors are ones I really like. They're tiny. They have a very small microphone, but they're very effective. And you do everything from an app, like setting those ranges and frequencies and times, which is neat. You can also purchase any of these. I mean, this is something that the public uses for fun. But these little units that plug into your smartphone are really cool. That's like a live detection of bats. So you can go out at night, snap that thing into your phone, and it'll show you what's flying by, which is pretty fun. It will tell you what kind of bat it is. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Bird people. Yes. So the one that I use is specific to the manufacturer. I use something called Kaleidoscope, and the people that make the detectors are called Wildlife Acoustics. Yeah. And of course they have, I mean, bats are just part of that. They definitely gear towards bird people too. So not terribly expensive anymore. It's getting cheaper. But what's neat is the battery power and the size of memory cards are getting bigger, so you can record. We have a unit. It's not pictured here. It's a different kind of unit. It's larger. You put in like a 1 terabyte card with some big batteries or a solar panel, and you can leave it out there for 3 months. So we put detectors down like in White Rock Canyon for cuckoos, for instance, and that's a tough hike. So, we put it down there and we go back a couple months later. And we can do the same with bats. We can leave detectors out for long periods of time, which is pretty neat. Yeah. Next slide. So of course for bats, that's not acoustic. This is all ultrasonic for the most part, right? This is a very simplified image of a spectrogram from a bat call or a chirp, we call them. It shows you the frequency over time. Different species of bats will have a different shape to their chirp, and they'll also have a different range in how often they chirp. That'll change depending on if there's prey nearby, right? So if they're trying to hone in on something. Birds can be very specific with their call frequencies and their call times, right? You can almost, I can see a pinyon jay call from everything else, for instance, knowing how much spacing between each and what it looks like. You can't. Good question. You cannot hear them. So, humans are about 20 kilohertz, I think, on the highest level, somewhere around there. But a common myoted bat is anywhere between 120 and 170, right? So that's why we need this technology, because there are bats flying all around us and we don't know unless you have a detector. Whole businesses have been created around this. There's people who actually get hired to decipher your bat sounds because they're so similar and you're trying to differentiate your species. So you can ask somebody to do that for you. It's become a hot topic in the bat world because of that challenge of differentiating. Tricolored bats, which are potentially listed, look a lot like a couple other myoted species. So how can you say I've got a tricolored bat on my land for sure? And so there's complexities, and we talk about that with our bat scientists about making that call, right? And sometimes that involves trying to then catch that species in person to verify. And the reason we know all of this, the reason we know what different spectrograms look like for different species is because people have caught the bats in nets, and as they let the bat go, they're recording the sound. And the more people do that, the better we get with this machine learning, right? The more calls we get, the more verified samples we get is great. Next slide. And you can do another one because it's got a fun picture, just because I like my spotted bat. So when you record your bats, you take an SD card back and you get wave files. And these different wave files, like I said, show you very specific spectrograms. There's something called a bat auto ID with the technology I use with Kaleidoscope. There's some debate on how accurate that is, but like it'll give you the 4-letter code of the bat and what it thinks it looks like. You can overlay it with your chirp, see if they line up, and that'll give you some sort of verification that you have that species present. And then, of course, you have some really cool data that spits out. You have p-values, you have match ratios to all that, so you can do cluster analysis with all of this stuff. Yes? Every bat here? Oh, here. Yes, that's a good question. I'm assuming so, because they all have that high frequency range. And the reason it brings me to a good point. That's a good question. The spotted bat that we have here, it loves our cliffs and canyons. Spotted bats are really cool because they actually can chirp at a much lower frequency. So we can actually hear spotted bats with our ears. There's a couple different species that do that. And that, of course, is a specialized adaptation. So they will call anywhere between 12 and 16 or 6 kilohertz. 9 to 12 is where their range tends to be. They're audible to humans. They can do specialized hunting of larger moths because of this, because these moths aren't hearing that frequency. So they can sneak up on them. And I've heard them on owl surveys. I've heard them on bat surveys. You can hear them chirping. Next slide. And so this is what's cool. What's happening with all of this neat ultrasonic data. USGS and a bunch of agency scientists got together. Boy, it's been almost 20 years maybe now, with the North American Bat Monitoring Program, and they're asking people all over the country and Canada and anywhere else in Mexico, if possible, to submit their acoustic or their ultrasonic data. And you can upload the data. It's shared with whoever wants to use it. So I get lots of requests from graduate students who are doing a research project on a certain species. They can use your data. And it's just location data, right? So you know that you have that bat right in that point or that species is present. And so it's a neat sharing project that's going on. And it's been very effective. And ranges are changing all the time of different species. But this is an example of what it looks like. You can go and look at the data. You can look up anybody else's data. It's all divided into a grid. So there's grids across the continent. And you pick a grid and you put a detector out there. And just the cooperation of it is a pretty neat concept. So how can you help bats? And before I get on to this final idea, are there any questions about the sciencey bits? You can always have questions at the end if there's any. Mm-hmm. They are kilometer grids that are laid out by the program. And if you happen to have a grid smack on your property, you can claim that grid and put your detector out. Yeah, I think this is just, I want to say this is maybe priority grid cells. So every year they give different grid cell locations priority, if that makes sense. So this is just a selection of them. And I think a lot of that is randomized, right? Because they want to get a randomized sample. But there are definitely more in Albuquerque. It may just be because of what I typed in there for within that span of the map. That's what it showed up. But yeah, I'm sure that there's some in Albuquerque. Yeah. Mhm. It's the same idea. They are just finding ways to a little change in that rock structure. It doesn't take much, right? They're very small feet. So just this tiniest little overhang they can grasp. They sometimes use each other. So you'll see a cluster and it'll have like a foot on a rock and a foot on another bat. That happens. But yeah, that's a good question. It's a very interesting substrate that they'll use. So some places in the cave, you won't see bats hanging and you think, okay, it must not be grippable. There's ceilings that look awesome, and you think, oh, this would be an ideal spot, and there's no bats. Yeah, good question. All right, so a few things we can do as people. Now, depends on if you really want to have more bats in your area. Some people maybe don't want more bats, but I like the idea of more bats. Go ahead and next slide. So a good idea, of course, is planting native species, right? We're all sort of conscious of that. Um, they bloom at night. That's the ones we like, primary food source. And bats eat flying insects at night, so you want to plant flowers that either stay open through the night or bloom in the evening. And of course, you want to try to choose the ones that match where you live. You want a native species to attract those native bugs. So bats love to eat moths, so planting host plants, lots of those moths will come. I'm not much of a botanist, so I don't know if I could spit out a bunch of species, but it's something you could look up. Light colored flowers have been shown as attractants for moths, so white and light colored. And stinkier the better, if that's an option. Insects, of course, like fragrant things, so that'll bring more bugs around. Next slide. So bat houses. Bat houses are frustrating to people. Warmth matters and location matters with bat houses. We're learning a lot now about what went wrong with bat houses and what can go right with bat houses. A lot of people make bat houses, they're too wide, they're too thin, they don't have a way for them to crawl in, there's nothing for them to grab onto. So that's all changing, and there's some websites you can look up that show you all those different features that you want to include. But height is very important when you put a bat house out. And putting it near a place with bugs is always a good idea. Away from branches that might have predators. Owls are waiting sometimes for the bats to come out. And low light, all of that sort of common sense, right? I do know that in some situations, bat houses can take several years to be occupied. So if you put your bat house out, don't expect anything to happen immediately. You have to have some patience. Next slide. So they use snags. This was a big part of my graduate work, looking at the importance of snags. There's been a whole paradigm shift in forestry around snags. We used to call them widow makers, and forestry people wanted to knock them down right away, right? Because they're dangerous, they didn't seem to have any value. That's all changed immensely in research. They use them for sleeping, resting, raising their young in some cases. They've been shown to use large diameter snags compared to small diameter. I tend to think it more has to do with the state of the bark. So, is there a cavity? Is it the right temperature? And then um, younger snags will have more loose peeling bark on the outside, and some bats will just hang out for a day or two under a piece of sloughing bark before they move on. So, they've been shown to move roost locations during a season. And of course, snags provide habitat for insects. Um, next slide. Oop, did I already go? Oh, here we are. Where am I? Yeah, okay. That's what I have. So, of course, pesticides, right? Try to eliminate pesticides. It seems pretty common sense. But a big thing that's coming out, of course, is bats and cats. So people are starting to understand the sheer impact. We already know the impact it's having to birds. But some interesting studies have come out. 30% of bats in one study that were admitted to a wildlife center were cat victims. Bat Conservation Trust found that 250,000 bats per year died as a result of cat attacks. That's in the UK alone. In Jamaica, one of the most endangered bats is under threat of extinction from cats. And in some places, they've just shown cats waiting outside of places. Either it's a bat house or a cave or a mine, waiting for those bats to come out. So, of course, cats are very smart, but they're causing a lot of damage. Um, and then, of course, we talked about light. Light pollution is a problem both for migratory birds and bats. Um, but these are just a few ideas on how you can encourage bats, um, bring them around you if you want them. But of course, like I said, that's not everybody's cup of tea. But if you're all here, I figure you're all enamored of bats. And that's all I have for my presentation. I appreciate y'all coming to learn about this misunderstood and elusive species. Um, I'm happy to take questions, antidotes. Yeah. Most of those species that I listed. So the hoary bats, the silver-haired is very common here. Spotted species in the county. Not not sure. That's the mystery. There are a handful of known maternity roosts of different species. In the Jemez, there's a few locations that are known. People don't talk about it. Um, yeah, no, but there are some large roosts. I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination. We have a lot of bats that roost in our buildings around Los Alamos. I mean, that's a very common place. We get western small-footed bats all the time hanging outside of our office building. So obviously they're roosting in there. There's probably hundreds of unknown places. We don't know where they're going. We don't know where they're coming from. We can do telemetry to figure that out. It's kind of an extensive process. But there has been telemetry studies done here, and a lot of the species they disperse into the cliffs and caves and haven't been able to be tracked beyond that, right? So that spotted bat will go up there, and then where exactly is it going is hard to say. There is a little off topic, but there's a scientist in Colorado who started bat conservation, climbers for bat conservation, and they use rock climbers to identify spots. Um, Something to think about around here. Yeah, because they get places we can't get, especially if you know where a bat's going. But we have a way too for people to report that, hey, I was just rock climbing the other day and I put my hand in a crevice and there was a bat. Um, they're just really hard to find. But yes, we have buildings, we have caves, we have cliffs, we have all of that. Hard to say. Uh huh. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it could just be an excellent source of insects. Maybe there's some water nearby. where things are hatching and bats are hanging out. Water's a great resource if you're looking for bats in the desert. They tend to find those sources. Yeah, I mean, bats will commingle for sure. Um, but to answer your question about roosts and where they may be, my suspicion is there's just a handful of roosts that we just don't know about. Whether there's maternity roosts in Los Alamos, don't know yet. Um, so we have not detected it because we have not started swabbing bats yet. So I came to the program. A lot of the work I mentioned I do outside of the lab, like a voluntary thing, because I have bat friends who always need help because it doesn't pay well. Um, but at the lab, we're in the process of getting through IACUC and all of those procedures in order to be able to trap and net, and then I would like to swab bats. I know that they've started swabbing up in Bandelier on a low level. I don't think they've done much of it. It may only be one season. And I don't know what their results are yet, but they were swabbing. I was swabbing with them. Yeah.
Slides you showed
Hmm.
that it's obvious on some bats.
Yeah.
Swab.
Yeah, because it's not obvious on all bats, right? That's a good question. Some of those species, it affects different species differently. But a lot of the bats we found in caves over the last few years look fine. When you open up the wing, if you take ultraviolet light, you can see some old lesions, you can see some scarring. It may be old white nose, it may just be sort of subdued given the time of year and comes back when they hibernate. I've never seen a bat covered in fungus. So swabbing is necessary. Yeah, it can be a little bit hard to see. Yeah, but it's still bothering them enough to wake them up and cause strange behaviors. Yeah, yeah.
Like bats as mammals, they carry a lot of infectious diseases, but
Hmm.
they have their immune response is very adept. I can't remember. I think it was related to their body temperature or
Yeah,
something,
yep.
but that's why, like with COVID, a
Mhm.
lot of these infectious agents that jump from mammals to humans,
Right,
bats are always like the prime suspect because they're infected with a lot of things, but they're carriers. They don't
right.
necessarily harm the bats, but I can't remember the details.
No,
But
that's absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah, bats have a whole ecosystem going on their fur. And there's a researcher out of UNM who does lots of studies. She has us swab the whole bat because she wants to know what else is going on. So there's a whole system going on in their bodies, and that's due to their habits of hibernation, that cold, moist situation, some things like that. And then they go out in the sun and they get warm in their roost. And so there is a plethora, yeah, of different things that they can carry. They are immune, it seems, to the majority of those things. I mean, it's really remarkable.
maybe they
Yeah,
are in
they can get sick, but it won't necessarily kill them. Yeah, and I think that's just evolution. I think they've just evolved to the point, but it's their nestling, the way that they snuggle together that causes that transfer sometimes more than other species. When you look at the concerns about COVID, for instance, and bats, of course, were um, the go-to. And there's still debate about it, but what happened in a lot of those places like Southeast Asia and China, where people have bats in markets, they're they tend to be finding bats that are like those flying fox types. They are very communal, and they can be by the hundreds. And when they fly, all of the things that come off of their body when they're peeing and whatever through the air can disperse a lot of things. So they can be unfortunate vectors in that way, right? So you have large animals moving over large expanses in large numbers.
do you have a favorite bat? Like
um,
an exotic bat that you've seen?
well, actually, I've never held a spotted bat. I've never been that close to one. I hear them all the time. I've never caught one, and that tends to be because they tend to be sort of solitary. So you'll catch like one by itself. I was working in a nearby refuge, and the night I wasn't there, they caught one. So spotted bats are just cool because they have these wonderful black spots on their bodies, and they have these gigantic ears. So they're just really cool looking. But that's one of many. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. I think that like the cavate structures and things that we have are definitely something they like. All the cliffs and caves. I think we have a good number of night blooming things, and so the southern part of the state is very diverse compared to, it's got at least 10 more species than we get up here. Yeah, I think it's a unique climate that way. Migration contributes to it. But yeah, the caves are probably filled with them and we don't know. A few of them do. Yeah, not all. No, there's a few of them that go south. And when I say go south, northern Mexico, not super far, not like those nectar feeding bats that will follow the blooms of agave. There's cool restoration projects that are going on. As you can imagine, land development and shifts in climate are changing those blooming plant corridors, but they've been showing bats following the blooming cactus plants, and that's why they tend to go up and down. Yeah, not so much. No, those bats are going to be down south or they're going to be hibernating. Yeah. That's when we go in the caves, is in the winter. So they're sleeping. And when they sleep, they really sleep. They really have no idea you're there. It's pretty neat. Yeah. Any other questions online? Right on. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And to her point too, those black rocks that are down in the canyon, like when we hike down, the dark colored rocks are really warm, like they're radiating a lot. I wonder if that has something to do with the bats choosing those areas. But yeah, I imagine over the cliff and over the river, there's a lot. Yeah. 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 A lot of food. Yeah. Well, that's nice to hear. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and the research is showing that, especially in a maternity state, right? So the moms getting together, they tend to prefer pretty warm climates or pretty warm surroundings, warmer than people would have thought. So putting boxes on south-facing areas uh, is a good thing. Um, but yeah, I think the color of the rock makes a difference. I think how long they hold on to warmth can really matter, regulating temperatures of babies.
All right.
My
Well,
pleasure.
I want to thank you again
Thank you.
for
My pleasure.
great
Thanks for coming.
presentation.
Thank you.
All right.
Again, not my natural environment, but
No,
I
it was
love
fantastic.
topics. So
And there's our contact information if you have any other questions
Yeah.
for Milu. But thank you
Happy-
again for coming. And hopefully we'll see you at another program.
right on.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.